Sometimes the people who smile the most are the ones barely holding themselves together. Rain traced thin lines down the alley walls as Emily Carter pressed her back against the cold brick, her breath shallow, her fingers trembling around the strap of her worn purse, the world narrowing to the sound of her own heartbeat and the weight of a moment she had learned to endure in silence. And across the street, a black SUV idled without urgency, its engine a low, steady hum that didn't belong to this part of town. Hours earlier she had stood beneath soft golden lights at Bellini's, balancing a tray with practiced grace, her smile easy, almost convincing. As she moved between tables filled with laughter and polished voices, no one noticed the way her sleeve shifted just enough to reveal the faint outline beneath her skin, no one except him. Adrian Volkov sat at the corner table like he owned the air itself, his suit perfectly tailored, his presence quiet but absolute, and while others saw a waitress, he saw the hesitation in her movements, the way she avoided sudden contact, the way her eyes flickered toward the exit more than once. He didn't ask questions then, didn't need to, because men like him didn't guess, they knew. When she reached to steady a glass and her sleeve slipped just an inch too far, his gaze sharpened, not with curiosity, but with certainty. That wasn't clumsiness, that wasn't an accident, and for a brief second their eyes met, hers startled, his unreadable, and she pulled away first, retreating behind a practiced apology. "I'm fine." She had said to no one in particular, the same words she had been repeating for years. Later, when the night ended and the lights dimmed, she walked home alone, counting steps out of habit, the city quieter at this hour, but never truly silent. And now, in the alley, that silence pressed in heavier than before. She closed her eyes just for a second, gathering herself, reminding her own voice how to stay steady, how to stay invisible, because that was how she survived, unseen, unheard, untouched by anything that could make things worse. But the SUV door opened with a soft, deliberate sound that didn't belong to coincidence. Footsteps followed, measured, unhurried, and when she looked up, she saw him again, the same man from the restaurant, standing under the dim streetlight as if he had always been there, watching, understanding. His eyes moved once, taking in everything without a word, then settling back on her with quiet intensity, and for the first time that night, something shifted, not in the world around her, but inside her, because this time, someone had seen everything, and he hadn't looked away. Emily did not move at first, because movement meant acknowledgement, and acknowledgement meant everything she had spent years avoiding would suddenly become real, her fingers tightening slightly around her purse strap as the cool night air brushed against her skin. But Adrian Volkov did not rush, he simply stood there beneath the streetlight as if time answered to him, his presence steady, unshaken, and somehow louder than the silence around them. His gaze did not wander, did not flicker. It stayed on her with a calm precision that made it impossible to pretend nothing had happened. "You should not be here alone," he said finally, his voice low, controlled, carrying no judgment, only certainty. Emily swallowed, her throat dry, instinct telling her to deflect, to disappear back into the version of herself that smiled and said everything was fine. "I am fine," she replied quickly, the words automatic, rehearsed, but they sounded thinner now, weaker under the weight of his attention. Adrian tilted his head just slightly, not convinced, not even close, because men like him did not rely on words, they relied on what people tried to hide, and she had not hidden it well enough. "Not from him, no," he said quietly, not harsh, not loud, just final, as if the truth did not need volume to exist. The word settled between them, undeniable. Emily felt something shift in her chest, a small crack in the wall she had built so carefully. She looked away first, her eyes dropping to the pavement as if the ground could offer an escape. "You do not know anything about me," she said, softer now, more to protect herself than to convince him. Adrian stepped closer, but not enough to invade her space, just enough that the distance between them felt intentional, controlled. "I know enough," he answered, his tone unchanged, his eyes briefly moving to her wrist where the faint outline still lingered beneath the fabric, then back to her face. "You work too many hours, you smile when you are tired, and you pretend you are not hurting." Each word landed gently but precisely, like he was placing pieces of a truth she had tried to scatter. Emily's breath caught for a second, not because he was wrong, but because he was right in a way no one had ever been before. She forced a small shake of her head, clinging to the only defense she knew. "People notice things that are not there all the time," she whispered, But even she could hear the doubt in her own voice. Adrian studied her for a moment longer, then reached into his coat pocket, the movement slow, deliberate, non-threatening. When his hand came back out, it held a simple card, clean, unmarked except for a name and a number. He did not force it into her hand, did not step forward to close the distance, he simply extended it halfway, giving her the choice he knew she was not used to having. In case you decide to stop pretending, he said. His voice softer now, almost unreadable. Emily hesitated, her eyes fixed on the card like it carried more weight than it should, because accepting it meant admitting something she had spent years denying, that she needed help, that she could not do this alone. The second stretched, the city humming faintly in the background, and then slowly, almost without thinking, she reached out and took it, her fingers brushing against the edge for just a moment before pulling back. Adrian nodded once, not satisfied, not relieved, just acknowledging the smallest step forward. You are not invisible, he added quietly, turning slightly as if the conversation had already ended for him. Emily stood there, the card resting in her palm, her heart beating faster than before, not from fear this time, but from something unfamiliar, something she had not felt in a long time, the unsettling realization that someone had seen through her silence, and had chosen not to ignore it. Emily did not remember walking the rest of the way home, only the quiet weight of the card in her hand and the echo of his words repeating in her mind like something she could not turn off. You are not invisible. The sentence felt unfamiliar, almost uncomfortable, as if it did not belong to her life. By the time she reached her apartment building, the hallway lights flickered the way they always did, tired and unreliable, just like everything else she had learned to depend on. She paused at the door for a moment, steadying her breath before stepping inside, because no matter what happened outside, inside she had someone who needed her to be okay. Mom, a small voice called from the couch, and immediately her expression changed, softer, warmer, the kind of smile that came easier when it was for him. Hey, buddy, she said gently, setting her purse down and kneeling beside her son. Noah was curled under a thin blanket, his hair messy, his eyes heavy but waiting. You are late, he murmured, not accusing, just stating the truth in the simple way children do. Emily brushed a hand through his hair, her touch careful, grounding. I know, I had to finish my shift, but I am here now, she whispered, and for a moment, everything else faded, the alley, the fear, the man with the unreadable eyes, all of it replaced by the quiet rhythm of her son breathing beside her. This was why she endured everything, this was why she kept going, because he deserved something better, even if she did not know how to give it yet. Later, after Noah fell asleep, the apartment grew still again, the kind of silence that made thoughts louder. Emily sat at the small kitchen table, the overhead light casting a dull glow over chipped countertops and unpaid bills stacked neatly in the corner. Her fingers traced the edge of the card without picking it up at first, like it might disappear if she looked at it too directly. Adrian Volkov, the name felt heavy, unfamiliar, not part of her world, and yet somehow already too close to it. She turned the card over slowly, reading the number again, memorizing it without meaning to, her mind immediately pushing back, reminding her of all the reasons she should throw it away. People like him did not step into lives like hers without changing something, and change was dangerous when everything depended on stability, even fragile stability. She exhaled slowly, leaning back in the chair, her eyes drifting toward the hallway where Noah slept. She could not afford risks, she could not afford mistakes. She had spent too long building a life that barely held together as it was, and yet, the memory of his voice lingered, calm, certain, as if he had already seen the truth she refused to say out loud. You pretend you are not hurting. Her fingers tightened slightly, because pretending had always been easier than facing what came after. Asking for help meant admitting she needed it, and needing anything felt like losing control. Outside, a car passed slowly along the street, its headlights briefly illuminating the window, and for a second, Emily thought about the way he had stood there, not forcing, not demanding, just offering something she did not understand yet, a choice. And that was what unsettled her the most, because choices meant responsibility, meant deciding what came next instead of simply enduring what was already there. She looked down at the card again, the number steady, waiting, as if it would still be there no matter how long she avoided it, and for the first time in a long while, Emily realized something that made her chest feel tight in a different way, not fear, not exactly, but possibility. and she did not know which one scared her more. Morning came too quickly, the pale gray light slipping through the thin curtains as Emily stirred awake before her alarm could sound, her body already trained to move before rest could fully settle in. She lay still for a moment, staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet breathing from the next room, grounding herself in the only thing that felt certain. Then she sat up, reaching automatically for routine, because routine was safe, predictable, controlled. The card was still on the kitchen table where she had left it, untouched but not forgotten, its presence quiet but persistent, like a thought she could not quite push away. She moved past it at first, focusing instead on packing Noah's lunch, tying his shoelaces, brushing his hair back gently as he yawned and leaned into her. "Are you tired, Mom?" he asked softly, his small voice carrying more awareness than it should. Emily smiled, that same practiced smile. Softer now, real enough for him, just a little, "but I will be okay," she replied, because that was what she always said, and for him, she needed it to be true. The walk to the bus stop was calm, the air crisp, the city slowly waking around them, Noah's hand in hers, steady and trusting, and for a few minutes, everything felt almost normal, almost manageable, until she let go and watched the bus pull away, taking the best part of her day with it. The moment the bus turned the corner, the quiet returned, heavier now, and with it, the thoughts she had been holding back. She exhaled slowly and turned toward work, but something felt different, subtle, like a shift she could not name. At the restaurant, the rhythm of the day began again, orders, footsteps, voices blending into a familiar pattern. Emily moved through it with practiced precision, but her awareness was sharper, as if she was noticing things she used to ignore, the way people looked at her, the way she held herself, the way she flinched before contact even happened. She caught her reflection briefly in a polished surface, her smile in place, her posture straight, but her eyes gave her away, just for a second, and she looked away quickly, adjusting her sleeve without thinking. "You look like you did not sleep," a voice said from behind the counter, her coworker Jenna watching her with mild concern. Emily shrugged lightly, keeping it casual. "Just a long night," she answered, and that was enough, because most people accepted easy answers, most people did not look deeper, most people did not notice. But as the hours passed, she found herself glancing toward the door more than once, not expecting anything, not hoping, just aware, and that awareness unsettled her, because it meant something had changed inside her, even if nothing had changed around her. The door opened at one point, a group of customers stepping in, laughter following them, and for a split second her breath caught, her eyes searching without permission. But it was not him, of course it was not. Men like Adrian Volkov did not return without reason, and that realization should have brought relief, but instead it left something else behind, something quieter, a question she could not answer, because now she knew what it felt like to be seen, and once that feeling existed, it did not disappear easily. It lingered, shifting the way everything else felt, as if the life she had been holding together so carefully had just been tilted slightly, not enough to break, but enough to make her notice the cracks. And as she reached for another tray, her fingers brushing against her sleeve again, she realized something that unsettled her more than anything else. She had not thought about hiding it in the same way today, not with the same urgency, not with the same certainty, because somewhere in the back of her mind, a quiet voice had started to form, one that sounded nothing like fear, one that sounded like a choice she had not allowed herself to consider before. The shift should have ended like any other, with tired feet and polite goodbyes. But something lingered in the air that Emily could not quite explain, a quiet tension that made her movements sharper, her senses more alert, as if she was waiting for something she had not admitted to herself. The dinner rush faded into the low hum of late evening, plates cleared, lights dimmed slightly, and one by one the tables emptied until only a few scattered conversations remained. Emily wiped down the counter slowly, her reflection faint in the polished surface, her sleeve slipping just enough for her to notice before anyone else could, and this time she did not rush to fix it, not immediately, not instinctively. She paused, just for a second, as if testing what it felt like to not hide so quickly. "You are different tonight," Jenna said from across the counter, her voice casual but observant. Emily blinked, caught off guard by the comment. "Different how?" she asked, keeping her tone light. Jenna shrugged, drying a glass with a cloth. "I do not know, just like you are paying attention to something." Emily gave a small smile, brushing it off, but the words settled deeper than she expected. because it was true, she was paying attention, to herself, to the space around her, to the quiet shift that had started the moment someone looked at her and did not look away. The door chimed softly as it opened again, and this time Emily did not mean to look, but she did, her eyes lifting almost on their own, and everything in her stilled for half a second. Adrian Volkov stepped inside like he belonged there, like the room adjusted itself around him without question, his presence calm, controlled, unchanged from the night before, but this time there was no surprise in her reaction, only awareness. He was not looking for a table, not scanning the room, he already knew exactly where she was, his gaze finding her with quiet certainty, and something in her chest tightened, not fear, not quite, something closer to anticipation that she did not know how to handle. Emily straightened slightly, her hand brushing against the counter as she steadied herself. Jenna glanced between them, curiosity flickering across her face, but she said nothing, because even she could sense that this was not a normal interaction. Adrian walked forward with measured steps, each one unhurried, deliberate, until he stopped just across from her side of the counter, close enough to speak without raising his voice. "You kept it," he said simply, his eyes dropping briefly to where the faint outline of the card pressed against the fabric of her apron pocket. Emily felt her breath catch, surprised that he noticed something so small, something she had barely acknowledged herself. "I did not say I would use it," she replied quietly, meeting his gaze this time, not looking away as quickly as before. Adrian's expression did not change, but something in his eyes softened, almost imperceptibly. "You do not have to," he said, his voice steady, "but you also do not have to pretend you do not have a choice." The words settled between them, heavier than they sounded, because choice was exactly what she had been avoiding. Emily glanced down for a moment, her fingers lightly gripping the edge of the counter, grounding herself. "Choices come with consequences," she said softly. More honest than she intended. Adrian nodded once, acknowledging the truth in that. "So does doing nothing," he replied, and that landed deeper than anything else he had said, because she knew it was true, she had lived it, day after day. Silence had its own cost. Emily looked back at him then, really looked this time, trying to understand why he was here again, why he had returned when he could have walked away like everyone else. "Why do you care?" she asked, the question quiet but direct. Adrian held her gaze without hesitation, his answer coming without pause. "Because I saw you," he said, as if that explained everything, and somehow, it did, more than she was ready to admit. The room around them seemed to fade slightly, the noise, the movement, all of it distant compared to the weight of that simple truth, and for the first time, Emily realized that being seen was not just something that changed a moment, it changed everything that came after. Emily did not answer right away, because his words did not feel like something that needed a quick response. They felt like something that settled deeper, something that stayed. She held his gaze for a moment longer before looking down, her fingers brushing lightly against the edge of her apron where the card rested, grounding herself in something physical, something she could control. "Seeing someone does not mean you understand them," she said quietly, her voice steady but softer now, less defensive than before. Adrian did not move, did not interrupt, he simply listened, the way he had from the beginning, without rushing, without pushing. "No," he agreed after a moment, his tone calm, "but it is a place to start." Emily let out a slow breath, her shoulders relaxing just slightly, not enough for anyone else to notice, but enough for her to feel it. The tension that had been constant for so long shifting, not disappearing, just changing shape. "And what happens after that?" she asked, her eyes lifting again, searching his face for something she could not name. Adrian's expression remained composed, but there was something else there now, something quieter, more deliberate. "That depends on you," he said, and the simplicity of it caught her off guard, because she had expected something else, an answer that told her what to do, what to expect. But instead he gave her something she was not used to: control. Emily glanced away again, her thoughts moving faster now, because control was not something she had trusted in a long time. Control meant responsibility, meant decisions, and decisions meant consequences she could not always predict. "I do not have time to figure things out," she said, almost to herself, her voice carrying a trace of exhaustion that she could not hide completely. Adrian followed her line of sight briefly, noticing the small details around her, the long hours, the constant motion, the way she carried everything alone. "You have time to survive," he said quietly, "but that is not the same as living." The words landed heavier than he intended, or maybe exactly as he intended. Emily stilled for a second, her hand tightening slightly on the counter, because that distinction was not something she had allowed herself to think about. Surviving had always been enough, it had to be, anything more felt like a risk she could not afford. Living is a luxury, she replied, her tone more guarded now, retreating slightly into the version of herself that felt safer. Adrian did not argue, did not dismiss her words, he simply nodded once, acknowledging the truth in them. So is being alone, he said, and that shifted something again, subtle but undeniable, because loneliness was not something she had ever named out loud, but it had always been there, woven into every quiet moment, every decision she made by herself. Emily looked at him again, really looked this time, trying to understand why he spoke the way he did, why he saw the things he saw. You talk like you know what that feels like, she said, her voice quieter now, more curious than defensive. Adrian's gaze held hers, steady, unflinching. I do, he answered simply, and for a brief second, something passed between them that had nothing to do with power or control, something human, something real, the kind of understanding that did not need explanation. The moment lingered, quiet and fragile, until the sound of the door opening broke it, another customer stepping inside, the normal rhythm of the world returning. Emily blinked, pulling herself back, aware again of where she was, what she was doing. Adrian stepped back slightly, giving her space, not retreating, just adjusting. I will not ask you again, he said calmly, his voice returning to that controlled tone, but the option does not disappear. Emily nodded slowly, not trusting herself to say anything more, because she did not know what she would say, and as he turned to leave, his presence fading from the space as quietly as it had arrived, she realized something that unsettled her more than anything else. She was not relieved that he was gone, she was thinking about what he had said, about choices, about living, about the possibility that something different could exist beyond the life she had been holding together, and for the first time, she did not push that thought away immediately. She let it stay, just for a moment longer than before. The night did not end when Adrian walked out, it followed Emily home in quiet thoughts that refused to settle. The city felt different now, not louder, not darker, just more noticeable, like she had been moving through it half asleep before and something had finally woken her up. She walked the familiar route back to her apartment, counting steps out of habit, but her mind was not focused on survival this time. It kept circling back to his words, to the way he had looked at her without hesitation, without doubt, as if he had already decided something she had not yet accepted. When she reached her building, she paused again at the door, the same way she had the night before. But this time it was not just exhaustion that held her still, it was hesitation, the kind that came from knowing something inside her had shifted, even if nothing around her had changed. Inside, Noah was already asleep, the small lamp casting a soft glow over the room, his steady breathing filling the quiet space with something that felt safe. Emily sat beside him for a moment, brushing his hair back gently, grounding herself in the one thing that always made sense. I have got you, she whispered softly, more to herself than to him, because she needed to believe it, she needed to hold on to that certainty. Later, she moved to the kitchen, the dim overhead light flickering slightly as she leaned against the counter, her eyes drifting to the small table where she had left the card the night before, except it was not there anymore. Her breath caught for a second before she remembered. She had moved it, slipped it into her apron before leaving for work, and now it was with her again. A quiet presence she could not ignore. She reached into her pocket slowly, pulling it out, turning it between her fingers, the edges smooth, the name still unfamiliar and yet no longer distant. Adrian Volkov. She said it quietly under her breath, testing how it sounded, as if saying it made it more real, more connected to her life than it should have been. She exhaled slowly, setting the card down in front of her, her mind already listing reasons to let it go, to keep things as they were, because what she had might not be much, but it was something she understood, something she could manage. But then another thought followed, quieter, more persistent, asking a question she could not easily dismiss. What if managing was not enough anymore? What if surviving was not the same as living? She pressed her lips together, shaking her head slightly as if to clear the thought, because thinking like that felt dangerous. It felt like stepping into something uncertain, and uncertainty was not something she could afford, not with Noah depending on her, not with everything balanced so carefully on decisions she could not take back. Outside, a car slowed briefly in front of the building, its headlights casting a faint glow through the window. Emily glanced up instinctively, her heart picking up just slightly. Before she caught herself, it was not him, of course it was not, she was not expecting him to be there, she should not be expecting anything at all, and yet the awareness remained, the possibility that something beyond her control had already begun. She looked back down at the card, her fingers resting lightly against it, not picking it up, not pushing it away, just letting it exist in the space between decision and hesitation, and for the first time in a long time, Emily realized that doing nothing was also a choice, one she had been making for years without question, and now, for reasons she did not fully understand, that choice did not feel as safe as it once had. The next morning did not feel the same, even though everything looked exactly as it always did, the same gray light slipping through the curtains, the same quiet hum of the city waking up outside, the same routine waiting for her to step into it. But Emily noticed the difference in the smallest ways, in how long she stood at the sink staring at nothing, in how her hand lingered just a second longer over the coffee cup, in how her thoughts did not settle as easily as they used to, because now there was something else there, something she had not allowed before, awareness. Noah's voice pulled her back gently, asking for cereal, for help tying his shoes, for the simple things that made up his world, and she answered the same way she always did, with patience, with care, with a smile that came easier when it was for him. But even as she moved through those familiar motions, part of her mind stayed somewhere else, replaying words she had not asked to remember. You have time to survive, but that is not the same as living. She pushed the thought aside as they stepped out into the cool morning air, her hand wrapped around Noah's, steady, grounding. The walk to the bus stop felt shorter today, or maybe her thoughts just made it pass differently. When the bus doors closed and Noah waved from his seat, she waved back, holding that moment for as long as she could before turning away, because once he was gone, everything else came rushing back in, the quiet, the wait, the questions she had been avoiding. At work, the rhythm picked up quickly, orders called out, plates moving, voices blending into the background, and Emily moved with it, efficient, focused, doing everything she had always done. But she noticed something else now, the way her mind drifted when there was a pause, the way her attention shifted toward the door without her permission, as if expecting something she had no reason to expect. You are distracted again, Jenna said lightly as she passed by, and Emily forced a small smile. Shaking her head, just thinking, she replied, but that answer felt too simple for what was really happening, because thinking was exactly the problem. Thinking led to questions, and questions led to choices, and choices were what she had spent years avoiding. The afternoon slowed into early evening, the light outside dimming gradually, casting longer shadows across the restaurant floor, and with each passing hour, Emily told herself the same thing, that nothing was going to happen, that yesterday had been an exception, not a beginning, that people like him did not return without reason, and she had given him none. But even as she repeated that to herself, something in her did not fully believe it anymore, because now she understood something she had not before, that some moments did not end when they were over, they carried forward, shaping what came next whether she wanted them to or not. The door opened again, the soft chime echoing through the space, and this time she did not look immediately. She forced herself to finish what she was doing first, to keep control, to stay grounded in the present. But her heartbeat picked up anyway, steady but noticeable, and when she finally glanced up, her eyes scanned the room quickly, almost instinctively, searching without admitting it. He was not there, not this time, and a part of her felt relief, because it meant things could go back to normal. But another part, quieter, harder to ignore, felt something else entirely, something she did not want to name, because naming it would make it real. She turned back to her work, focusing on the next task, the next movement, but the feeling stayed, subtle but persistent, like a question waiting for an answer she had not yet decided to give. And as she reached into her apron pocket without thinking, her fingers brushed against the edge of the card again, reminding her that whether she chose it or not, the possibility was still there, unchanged, waiting for the moment she stopped pretending it did not matter. The hours stretched longer than they should have, as if time itself had slowed just enough for Emily to feel every passing second, every thought that refused to settle. The restaurant filled and emptied in waves, voices rising and falling, plates moving in steady rhythm, and through it all she moved the same way she always had, efficient, quiet, careful not to draw attention. But inside, something was no longer as still as it used to be. Her mind kept circling back to the same place, the same question she had been avoiding since the moment she slipped that card into her pocket, not whether she should use it, but why she had not thrown it away yet. That was the part she could not explain, because if it meant nothing, it would have been easy to let it go, but it was still there, resting against the fabric, a small, constant reminder that something outside her control had already entered her life. "Emily, table 7 needs you," Jenna called out, breaking her thoughts, and she nodded quickly, stepping back into motion, focusing on the task in front of her, because tasks were simple, tasks did not ask questions, but as she approached the table, her attention caught on something else, a familiar stillness in the air, the kind that did not belong to normal conversation. Her eyes lifted instinctively, scanning the room without thinking, and this time she found him. Adrian Volkov was already seated, not at the corner this time, but closer, within her space, within her routine, as if the distance between their worlds had quietly narrowed without her noticing. He was not speaking, not eating, just watching the room with that same calm awareness, and when her eyes met his, it was immediate, direct, like he had known she would look eventually. Her steps slowed just slightly, barely noticeable to anyone else, but enough for her to feel it, that shift in control she had been trying to hold on to. She reached the table beside his first, forcing herself to continue working, to keep moving, because stopping would mean acknowledging something she was not ready to face. But even as she spoke to another customer, took an order, smiled politely, she could feel his presence, steady, unchanging, not demanding attention, but impossible to ignore. When she finally turned toward him, it felt less like a choice and more like something inevitable. She approached slowly, her posture straight, her expression composed, the version of herself she showed the world fully in place. "What can I get for you?" she asked, her voice even, professional, but quieter than usual. Adrian did not answer immediately, his gaze studying her in that same precise way, not invasive, not careless, just aware. "You have not called," he said instead, his tone calm, as if stating a fact rather than asking a question. Emily's breath caught for a fraction of a second before she steadied it, her fingers tightening slightly around the notepad in her hand. "I did not say I would," she replied, repeating her words from before, but this time they sounded different, less certain. Adrian nodded once, accepting the answer without argument. "No," he agreed, "you did not." The silence that followed was not uncomfortable, but it was heavy, filled with everything neither of them was saying. Emily shifted her weight slightly, grounding herself, reminding herself where she was, what she was doing. "Are you here to order something?" she asked, bringing the conversation back to something she could control, something simple. Adrian's gaze held hers for a moment longer before he reached for the menu, glancing at it briefly as if the decision did not matter. "Coffee," he said finally. Setting it aside, Emily nodded, writing it down even though she would not forget, turning to leave before the moment could stretch any further, but his voice stopped her again, quiet, steady. "You are still thinking about it," he said, not a question, and that made her pause, just for a second, because denying it felt pointless now. She did not turn back fully, just enough to acknowledge him without giving too much away. "Thinking does not mean deciding," she said softly, and Adrian's response came just as calmly, "No, but it means you are no longer ignoring it," and that was the part she could not argue with, because ignoring it had been easier, safer, and now that option was slipping away. Slowly but surely, she walked back toward the counter, the sound of her own footsteps louder than before, her mind no longer quiet, because now she understood something she had been trying not to see. This was not about him showing up, it was about what his presence had already changed inside her, and no matter what she chose next, she would not be able to go back to the version of herself that never questioned anything at all. Emily placed the coffee in front of him with steady hands, but the moment her fingers released the cup, she felt it again, that quiet shift inside her, the one that made everything feel slightly out of alignment, like her world had tilted just enough that she could no longer pretend it was stable. Adrian did not thank her right away, he simply watched the steam rise from the cup as if time moved differently for him, slower, more deliberate, and then his eyes lifted to hers again. "You are tired," he said calmly, not as an observation meant to fill silence, but as something he had already concluded long before speaking. Emily let out a small breath, almost a quiet laugh without humor. "Most people are," she replied, deflecting as she always did, but Adrian did not look away, did not accept the easy answer. "Most people hide it better," he said, and that landed differently, because she knew he was not talking about sleep. Emily glanced around briefly, aware of the space, the customers, the normal life continuing around them as if this conversation did not exist, and maybe that was what unsettled her the most, how easily two realities could exist at the same time. One where everything was fine, and one where nothing was. You noticed too much, she said quietly, her voice lower now, more honest than before. Adrian reached for the cup, taking a slow sip before answering, his movements controlled, unhurried. No, he said, setting it down carefully, I just do not ignore what is in front of me. Emily felt that. Again, that subtle pressure, not forceful, not demanding, but persistent, like a truth she could not step around anymore. She looked down at the table for a moment, her fingers brushing lightly against the surface as if grounding herself. And what do you think is in front of you? She asked, her voice steady but softer now, less guarded. Adrian did not answer immediately, his gaze thoughtful for a brief second before returning to her. Someone who has been strong for too long without anyone noticing, he said, and the simplicity of it made her chest tighten in a way she was not prepared for, because it was not dramatic, not exaggerated, it was just accurate, and that was harder to dismiss. Emily swallowed, her throat dry, her instinct telling her to step back, to close the distance he had been quietly reducing since the moment they met. You are making assumptions, she said, but the words lacked conviction. Adrian tilted his head slightly, studying her with that same calm focus. Then correct me, he replied, and that was what made her pause, because correcting him meant saying something real, and saying something real meant letting go of the version of herself that kept everything controlled. She hesitated, her eyes lifting to meet his again, and for a second, just a second, the answer almost came, but then the sound of a chair moving nearby pulled her back, reality pressing in again, reminding her of where she was, what she was supposed to be doing. Emily straightened slightly, retreating just enough to regain her balance. I have work to do, she said quietly, and Adrian nodded, not pushing, not stopping her. You always do, he replied, and there was no judgment in it, only understanding, which somehow made it harder to walk away. She turned, moving back toward the counter, her steps measured, controlled, but her mind anything but steady, because now the question was no longer whether she would ignore what he was saying, it was whether she could. And as she reached for another order, her fingers brushing once again against the card in her pocket, she realized something that made her pause for just a fraction of a second. She had stopped asking herself if she would call him, and had started asking herself when the rest of the shift passed in fragments, moments that should have felt routine but no longer did. Emily moved from table to table, her step steady, her voice calm, her smile practiced, but everything beneath that surface had shifted. Each interaction felt thinner, less real, as if her mind was somewhere else entirely, caught between what she had always known and what she was beginning to understand. Adrian did not call her back again, did not demand her attention. He remained at his table, quiet, composed, as if he had already said everything he needed to say, and somehow that made his presence even harder to ignore, because there was no pressure, no urgency, just a certainty that lingered in the air, as if time was on his side. When he finally stood to leave, it was without hesitation, without looking back immediately, but as he reached the door, he paused, just for a second, his gaze shifting across the room until it found her again, and in that brief moment, something passed between them that did not need words, something final and unfinished. At the same time, then he was gone, the door closing softly behind him, the space returning to its normal rhythm. But Emily did not feel normal anymore. She stood still for a second longer than she should have, her hand resting against the edge of the counter as she watched the place where he had been, her thoughts louder now, clearer, and more difficult to push away. Earth to Emily, Jenna's voice cut in gently, a small smile on her face. You are definitely somewhere else tonight. Emily blinked, pulling herself back into the moment, forcing a small laugh. Just tired, she said again, but the words felt weaker now, less convincing even to herself. Jenna studied her for a second, then shrugged lightly, letting it go, because most people did not look deeper, and for the first time, Emily noticed the difference between that and what she had experienced. Being seen was not comfortable, but it was real, and now that she had felt it, everything else felt incomplete. The shift ended later than usual, the final table cleared, the lights dimmed further, and one by one the staff began to leave, the quiet settling in around her once again. Emily gathered her things slowly, her movements deliberate, as if delaying something she had not fully decided to face yet. When she stepped outside, the night air was cooler, the city quieter, the streetlights casting long shadows across the pavement, and for a moment, she just stood there, breathing, letting the silence settle. Her hand slipped into her pocket almost without thinking, her fingers closing around the card. This time she did not hesitate, she pulled it out, holding it in front of her, the name, the number, still the same, unchanged, steady, waiting. Her heart beat a little faster, not from fear, but from the weight of what this moment represented, because this was not just about calling a number, it was about stepping into something unknown, something she could not fully control, and that had always been the line she refused to cross. She looked down at the card, then up at the empty street, her mind racing through every reason to walk away, to keep things the same, to protect the fragile balance she had built. But another thought followed, quieter, more persistent, asking a question she could no longer ignore. What if staying the same was the risk? Her breath slowed as she considered it, really considered it for the first time, the idea that doing nothing might not be the safest choice anymore, that surviving might not be enough. Her grip tightened slightly around the card, and before she could overthink it, before she could retreat back into the comfort of indecision, she reached into her bag, pulled out her phone, and stared at the screen for a moment that felt longer than it was. Then slowly, deliberately, she entered the number, her thumb hovering over the call button, her heart steady but louder than before, because this was it, the moment everything could change, and for the first time, Emily did not look away from that possibility. Her thumb hovered over the call button longer than she expected, the glow of the screen reflecting faintly in her eyes as the city moved quietly around her. Distant traffic, a passing breeze, the low hum of everything continuing as if this moment did not exist, but for Emily, everything had narrowed to this single decision. She could still walk away, still slip the phone back into her bag, still return to the version of her life that asked nothing more than endurance, and for a second, that option felt familiar, safe, predictable, but it also felt smaller now. Like something she had already outgrown without realizing it. Her breath steadied as she looked down at the number one more time, memorized now in a way that felt intentional, and then, before hesitation could return, she pressed call. The sound of the line connecting filled the silence immediately, each ring stretching just long enough to make her question what she had done, but not long enough to undo it. Her grip tightened slightly on the phone, her heart steady but present, reminding her that this was real, that she had crossed the line she had been standing at for days. And then the ringing stopped, a quiet shift in the air as the call connected. Yes, his voice came through, calm, certain, as if he had been expecting it. Emily blinked, caught off guard by how quickly he answered, how little hesitation there was on his end, and for a moment, she did not speak, the weight of the silence pressing in on her. But it was different now, not empty, not uncertain, just waiting. It is me, she said finally, her voice softer than she intended but steady. Adrian did not ask who, did not need confirmation. I know, he replied, and something in her chest tightened at the simplicity of that, because of course he did, he had known from the beginning. Emily glanced down the street, her free hand brushing lightly against her jacket as if grounding herself in something physical. I do not know why I called, she admitted, the honesty slipping out before she could filter it. Adrian's response came without pause, yes, you do, and that stopped her for a second, because he was right again. She did know, she just had not been ready to say it out loud. She exhaled slowly, her shoulders relaxing just slightly. I am not asking for anything, she said, almost as a warning, as if setting a boundary she was not sure she could maintain. Adrian's tone did not change, still calm, still controlled. I am not offering anything you do not choose, he said, and that shifted something again, because it removed the pressure she had expected, replaced it with something more difficult, responsibility. Emily closed her eyes briefly, letting the moment settle, letting the reality of what she had done fully reach her. She had made a choice, not out of fear, not out of necessity, but because she wanted to understand what came next. Then what happens now? She asked quietly, the question carrying more weight than it sounded. Adrian's answer came just as steady. Now you decide if you are ready to stop pretending everything is fine, and the words landed deeper this time, because she had already taken the first step, whether she admitted it or not. Emily opened her eyes again. The street in front of her unchanged, but everything inside her different. She Did not have the answer yet, did not know what ready looked like, but for the first time, she was no longer standing still. "I am listening," she said finally, her voice low but clear, and on the other end of the line, there was a brief pause, not hesitation, but acknowledgement, as if something had just begun, something neither of them would be able to walk away from easily. And as Emily stood there under the dim streetlight, phone pressed to her ear, she realized that this was no longer just a possibility, it was a direction, one she had chosen. Even if she did not yet understand where it would lead. The line stayed open for a moment after her words settled, not empty, not uncertain, just quiet in a way that felt intentional, as if Adrian understood that this was not something to rush, that whatever came next mattered more because she had chosen it herself. Emily shifted her weight slightly, the cool pavement beneath her feet grounding her as she waited, her breathing steady, her mind clearer than it had been in days. "Tomorrow," he said finally, his voice low and certain, "you will not go to work." The statement was not forceful, not commanding, but it carried a weight that made it feel like more than a suggestion. Emily's instinct reacted immediately, her grip tightening on the phone. "I cannot just not show up," she replied, the words coming quickly, almost defensive. Because responsibility had always been the line she refused to cross. Adrian did not interrupt, did not challenge her tone. "You will call in," he said calmly, as if the solution was simple, as if the barriers she saw were not as solid as she believed. Emily let out a quiet breath, her gaze dropping to the ground as she considered it. The idea felt wrong at first, unfamiliar. Like stepping outside the boundaries she had built her entire life around. "And then what?" she asked, softer now, not rejecting, just needing to understand. There was a brief pause on the other end, not hesitation, but precision. "Then you will meet me," he said, and this time the weight of his words settled differently, because this was not about a conversation in passing, not about moments in between her life. This was something that would exist outside of everything she knew. Emily looked up, her eyes scanning the empty street as if the answer might be written somewhere in front of her. "That is a big step," she said quietly, and for the first time, there was no resistance in her voice, only honesty. Adrian's response came just as steady. "So is staying where you are," he replied, and that truth landed deeper than anything else, because she could not deny it anymore. Staying meant continuing exactly as she had been. And for the first time, that did not feel as safe as it once had. Emily closed her eyes briefly, the sounds of the city fading into the background as she focused on the choice in front of her, not the fear, not the uncertainty, just the choice. When she opened them again, something in her had settled, not completely, not perfectly, but enough. "Where?" she asked, her voice low but clear, and on the other end, there was no pause this time, no need to consider. "I will send you the address," he said. Simple, direct, as if the decision had already been made. Emily nodded to herself, even though he could not see it, her fingers relaxing slightly around the phone. "All right," she said, the word quiet but definite, and for a second, neither of them spoke, the silence stretching between them in a way that no longer felt uncertain, just understood. "Emily," Adrian said then, her name steady on his voice, and something in her stilled at the sound of it, because he rarely used it, and when he did, it carried meaning. "You are not stepping into something you cannot leave," he continued, his tone softer now, not less certain, just more deliberate. "You are stepping into something you finally chose," and that changed everything, because it reframed the moment, removed the fear of being pulled into something beyond her control, and replaced it with the understanding that this was hers, her decision, her direction. Emily let out a slow breath, her shoulders easing just slightly as she absorbed that. "I understand," she replied, and this time, she meant it, not completely, not fully, but enough to take the next step. The call ended shortly after, no drawn-out goodbyes, no unnecessary words, just a quiet conclusion that felt like a beginning. Emily lowered the phone slowly, the screen going dark in her hand, and for a moment, she just stood there, the night around her unchanged, the street still empty, the air still cool, but everything inside her different, because tomorrow was no longer just another day to get through, it was something else entirely, something she had chosen. And as she slipped the phone back into her bag and turned toward home, she realized that for the first time in a long time, she was not just surviving what came next, she was stepping toward it.